welcome you again to our other session on imperfect markets. This time we are going to specifically look at oligopolies and monopolistic competition. Previously we looked at monopoly, so we're going to look at these other two market structures. Our aim in this is to examine the dynamics of these market structures with the aid of cost and revenue curves. Monopolies, we have already done monopolies. Like I said, today we are going to look at oligopolies and monopolistic competition. For the purposes of this lesson, the resources that we need a calculator, because we'll be doing some calculations, writing pads. You also need a pencil, because you will be required to draw graphs, approved text books, CAPS compliant, as well as the Mind the Gap, just as a start guide. Our lesson, like I said, is going to focus on oligopolies and monopolistic competition, but in particular, we will do a comparison of the two market structures in terms of the features or the characteristics that define the two market structures. You realize that there are some features where the two market structures show similarities, and at some features there will be some differences. So in this case, we are going to have some terminology, the terms that we are going to meet in our lesson. These terms are very important because they help you across our discussion to understand what we are going to talk about. So every time when you are confused, you have to refer back to these terms. They assist you to understand better your analysis of these market structures. But a thorough explanation of each and every term here will be done as we progress with our lesson. So most of these terms here, we're going to meet them in our discussion. I'm going to start with oligopolies. What do we mean by an oligopoly? An oligopoly is a market structure dominated by few but large sellers or producers, each of which has some control over the market. So for us to be able to tell that this market structure is an oligopolistic market structure, it's characterized by the number of firms. There should be very few, but the size, each firm is very large. That's why it has some considerable degree of control in the market. In South Africa, examples of such oligopolies include the banking industry, the network providers, cement manufacturers, insurance companies, petrol stations, and motor industry. As you can see here, these firms are very few. We can count them, but they are large in terms of size. So these are typical examples of firms that make up an oligopoly market in South Africa. What about monopolistic competition? Remember I said our analysis is based on comparison of the two. We're going to do it in tabular form, but first of all, we need to understand the two market structures separately, how they are defined. Then we'll do the comparison in tabular form. Monopolistic competition is a combination of perfect and imperfect competition. You did perfect markets and its characteristics. We did imperfect market. So far we've done monopoly. So when we say monopolistic, we are now combining the characteristics of monopoly as well as characteristics of perfect market. So that combination gives rise to a market structure known as monopolistic competition. And they say because it's a combination, it is usually referred to as a hybrid structure. Hybrid in the sense that it combines features of both imperfect market as well as features of perfect market. Therefore, a monopolistic competition is described as a market structure with many buyers and sellers. So from perfect market, that's the feature that you saw, which said in a perfect market, there are many buyers and sellers. Entry in this market is also relatively easy. It's a feature in the perfect market. But what makes it a hybrid structure now? The nature of the product. This time it is it's differentiated. So differentiated, that is imperfect. Entry into the market, relatively easy, that is perfect. Many buyers and many sellers, that is perfect. So a combination of those makes it now monopolistic, because one feature is imperfect market, other features are perfect market. When we combine them together, it becomes monopolistic competition, which is a hybrid structure. Examples of monopolistic competitors in South Africa are pharmacies, our grocery stores, hairdressers, restaurants, fast food outlets, and clothing stores. All these are typical examples of firms that are found in a monopolistic market. Let's now look at the comparison between the two. So when you compare, like I said, you need to identify a feature of the market structure. Then you try to compare the same feature between the two or more market structures. In this case, we are only looking at monopolistic and oligopoly, but sometimes the exam or the essay might require you to compare all the four or any of those market structures. So in this case, we are specifically looking at monopolistic and oligopoly, because we have already dealt with monopoly as a separate market structure. So the first feature that we are going to look at is number of firms. If you go to monopolistic competition, there is a large number of buyers and sellers. Oligopoly, very few, but large. So let's not confuse these two words. The same word, large. Under monopolistic, it's large numbers. What is large is the number, not the size of the firm. But when you go to oligopoly, it is very few, so the number is small, few firms, but each firm is large in terms of size. Now, if there are only two firms in an oligopoly market, it is called a duopoly. Examples of duopolies is the Visa and MasterCard, who control a large portion of electronic payments in the market in the financial market, as well as Apple and Android in smartphones. So they become duopolies because they control the largest market share in that market. So they become the two main players or the two main competitors in that market. Now, entry into the market is free in a monopolistic market. There are no barriers. In oligopoly, it is free but not easy. So in other words, we are saying it's free, but it's restricted. What shows us that entry in oligopoly is restricted? The fact that there are only few sellers. It shows us that you might try to enter the market, but it's very difficult. If entry was easy, we could be having as many sellers as possible. So the mere fact that entry into this market is restricted, it is evidenced by the idea that there are only few sellers in the market. The nature of the product. In a monopolistic market, the product is differentiated, meaning to say each seller sells its own unique brand. Differentiated means that the product is similar, but it is not identical. I gave an example of sellers of toothpaste here. You realize that everyone in this market is selling toothpaste, but each one will be selling their own particular brand. So one might be selling Colgate, another one is selling Aquafresh, the other one is selling Sensodyne, but the product is toothpaste, but differentiated in terms of the types of brands that each firm is selling. When we go to oligopoly, the product can either be homogeneous or differentiated. Homogeneous or differentiated. Homogeneous from perfect market, it means that the product is identical in every respect, size, the design, the quality, and everything. When a firm or when firms are selling a homogeneous product in this market, then it is referred to as a pure oligopoly. For example, in the case of sellers of cement or cement manufacturers, that's an example of a pure oligopoly because they are selling a homogeneous product. But in instances where firms are selling a differentiated product, we call it a differentiated oligopoly. So the nature of the market is determined by the nature of the product. In other words, we are saying whether it is a homogeneous oligopoly or a differentiated oligopoly, it depends on whether they are selling a homogeneous product or they are selling a differentiated product. Control over prices. They've got limited or some control under monopolistic, which means they are price setters. Why do we do we say they have some control? Because remember, I'm selling my own brand. Yes, we are all selling toothpaste, but I am selling Aquafresh. So I am able to charge the price of my own brand. So I've got some considerable control over the price only of my particular brand. So in that case, as a monopolistic competitor, they become price setters. The same applies with oligopoly markets. They've got considerable, but it is less than with the monopoly. They are also price setters. Why is it that they don't have as much control as monopoly? Remember, monopoly is one. So that one is able to charge whatever price they want. In this case, in as much as they can be able to set their own prices, but the fact that there are other players should be considered before an oligopolist sets its own price. Otherwise, they are going to lose customers to the competitors. Let's look at the type of profit that they make in the long run. Under monopolistic, they make normal profit in the long run. I'm sure in our lessons in perfect market, we were told what do we mean by normal profits. These are the minimum earnings that a business should acquire just to prevent it from exiting the market. So, and what makes this firm enjoy normal profits in the long run? Remember, we said entry in a monopolistic market is free and easy. As long as other firms realize that the monopolistic competitor is making profit, they are free to go and join the market. So the moment they enter into the market, they start sharing the market, they start sharing the customers, they also share the profits. So eventually, each and every firm in that market will end up making no profit at all. So when they don't make any profit, when they make zero profit, that's where they are making a normal profit. But with the oligopolistic firm, they continue to make economic profits even if they get into the long run. You are going to see when we talk about issues of collusion, that gives them a big advantage for them to be able to maintain their positive profits as they get into the long run. Market information under monopolistic is incomplete. Information for both buyers and sellers is incomplete in this market. For instance, buyers may not be able to easily compare the food and customer services among many different restaurants. The same applies also with oligopolistic firms. Information is incomplete, probably for both buyers as well as for the sellers. Another feature that we should look at is collusion. Under imperfect market, that is monopolistic, collusion is impossible. Firms cannot collude, but if you go to oligopoly, collusion plays a very prominent role in this market. And we are going to explain this. Firms can collude either through forming cartels, or they can collude through what is called price leadership. We'll discuss collusion. Non-price competition, both firms or both market structures, firms in monopolistic market as well as firms in oligopoly markets, they make use of non-price strategies. We're also going to discuss non-price strategies. Demand curve. We're also going to compare monopolistic market and oligopoly in terms of the type of the demand curve. If you go to monopolistic, they still have a normal downward sloping demand curve, just like in monopoly. So their demand curve is downward sloping, which is also the AR curve, all right? And how does it differ now from that of the oligopoly? A completely new demand curve that we are not quite familiar with. It has got what is called a kinked demand curve. We are going also to discuss this. So the main feature or the type of a demand curve in an oligopoly market is called a kinked demand curve. Kinked demand curve is a demand curve that has got two sections. So you realize that the first part of the demand curve is relatively elastic. Then from there, it changes the slope to becoming relatively inelastic. So where these two sections meet, that becomes our equilibrium. That is the kink, hence the name kinked demand curve. It just refers to a demand curve that has got two sections. The upper section of the demand curve is relatively elastic. The lower section is relatively inelastic. So let's look at what do we mean by elastic and what do we mean by inelastic. From grade 11, relatively elastic means customers or consumers are very sensitive to price what? Changes. You just try to increase your price, people will reduce their purchases of your product. They are responsive, they are sensitive. But this part of the demand curve, which is relatively inelastic, it means that people are less sensitive to price changes. Meaning to say, even if you increase the price, people will continue to buy more or less the same quantities because they are not very sensitive. One good advice here with this part of the demand curve is that you do not increase your revenue by reducing the price. Because if people are insensitive or are not sensitive to price changes, even if you reduce the price, you are not able to lure them to buy more through price what? Reduction. So that's the whole essence behind relatively elastic and relatively inelastic. And I understand with other market structures, you were talking of equilibrium where MR is called MC. With oligopoly, our equilibrium is always at the kink, where those two slopes of the demand curve meet becomes our equilibrium point. And that's where decision making is going to be done. Let's go to collusion now. Remember I said collusion is not possible in a monopolistic market, but it is very possible under oligopoly. Now, what do we mean by collusion? It is an agreement by firms to work together to limit competition amongst themselves with the aim of increasing each firm's profits. They do this by restricting output and increasing prices. When firms collude, they act as a collective monopoly. So when firms want to limit competition amongst themselves, that's when they jointly come together and work together as if they are operating as one firm. When they do that, we say they formed a collective monopoly. Now, how do they benefit? They are now able to set one price, which is very high. They are also now able to restrict production. In other words, they can actually create what we call artificial shortages so that people panic. Then they increase prices. You can take examples of even the petrol stations. They can operate as one. You try to go to BP thinking that maybe the price per liter is cheaper. You discover it is very high. You say, let me dodge and try another what? Filling station. You discover they are selling the same at the same price. So prices are now high for both firms. The ultimate advantage is that all these firms that have colluded, they are going to get higher profits, but at the expense of the consumer. Now, how do firms collude? We saw it in our characteristics. They can collude through what are known as cartels, or some can collude through what is called price leadership. So these two are different forms of collusion under oligopoly markets. So we're going to explain them. Let me start with cartels. A cartel occurs when two or more firms in the same industry formally and openly agree to control the market. So with cartels, they are doing it formally and they do it openly. Yes, they are still coming together. They are just agreeing. They are just controlling the market. They are just still exploiting consumers. But with cartels, they do it formally and openly. Now, this cartel can now be defined as an organization of oligopolistic businesses that comes into existence in an industry with the specific aim of forming a collective monopoly. Collective from the fact that it's now two or more businesses that have joined hands to operate as one. So they become a collective monopoly. Let's go to price leadership. Price leadership occurs when one firm, usually the price leader, announces its intention to increase its price in the hope that other firms will follow by increasing their prices also. If other firms respond by increasing their prices as well, then a pattern of price leadership has occurred. I'll explain this. Now, the price leader is usually the dominant or the largest firm in the market. Price leadership can also take place with a price reduction. So what do we mean? How do they collude through price leadership? Take, for example, network providers from our examples when we introduced our topic. One firm, because usually you discover that under cartels, these cartels are illegal in South Africa. The fact that they are exploiting consumers, the government makes it illegal. That's why they introduced the competition policy, competition commission, competition tribunal, competition appeal court. The idea there is to try and promote competition. But now with collusion, there is no competition. What is actually happening here is we are exploiting consumers. So the government has made this illegal. So if firms are investigated and it is discovered that they were forming cartels, they were colluding, then those firms can be penalized. They can be fined, they can be withdrawn their licenses, and so on. Now, realizing that firms have now come with a smart way of colluding, trying to escape the fines and the formal agreement that they do under cartels, which is now called what? Price leadership. So what do they do? This is just an example. So one of the network providers can actually announce its intention to increase tariffs. But this one is acting as a sign or a signal to other firms that, guys, indirectly I am saying let us increase our tariffs. So, but the firm that increases the price first is usually the one that is dominant or the largest firm in that market. So this sign is an indication to other firms that let us increase the tariffs or let us increase our prices. Now, if other firms respond by increasing their prices as well, then we say there's a pattern of price leadership, because the leader has increased his price first, followers responded by increasing their prices as well. So eventually, every firm will be selling at a higher price, and every customer will now be paying a higher price. So once again, consumers are exploited, but they've done it indirectly. That is called the price leadership. And it also works with a reduction in prices. The dominant firm can also announce its intention to reduce its price. And if other firms respond by reducing their prices as well, then we say there's price what? Leadership. Price leadership is also known as tacit or implicit collusion. It's implicit because it's not clear. It's not done formally. It's not done openly, but it's a form of collusion. So in your explanation, you can also get more marks if you're explaining price leadership by merely saying this is also known as tacit collusion, or it is also known as implicit collusion. Right? Let us go to non-price competition. Both oligopolies and monopolistic competitors try to avoid using prices to compete, because if, for example, all firms lower their prices, it will result in a price war and lower profits for everyone. So you do realize that under normal circumstances, firms try to attract customers away from competitors by reducing their prices. But the problem now is if you reduce your price, your competitor might also reduce their price. Because you still want to attract more customers, you reduce your price further, the competitor also reduces their price. So eventually, all of you are going to make losses. Now, to avoid that, firms thought of other strategies of attracting customers from their competitors, which are now called non-price strategies. What best can we do to maintain our price, but to attract as many customers as possible? Remember, we still want to make profits. If we reduce prices, we're going to make losses. Let us think of other means or other ways or other strategies of attracting customers, increasing our sales, making more profits, but without necessarily reducing the price. Hence, non-price strategies. So they have to devise such strategies, and they can take the following forms. If you want to beat your competitors, just develop your product. So one non-price strategy that can be used by firms is product development. You produce new products with new and unique features. Meaning to say, you are inventing or you are providing a product that is not being provided by your competitors. In so doing, you have beaten your competitors, and you can get more customers than your rivals. You can also do this by advertising. Advertise extensively so that you can continue to attract more and new customers. They also make use of loyalty schemes. Customers sign up for loyalty and shop in one place. In other words, you become loyal to a certain shop, or you become loyal to a certain brand. So that even if your a competitor says, I'm reducing the price, but because I've become loyal to buying from this shop, or I've become loyal to buying this type of a brand, I will continue to buy that. So they are trying to cement their relationships with their customers. Branding is another non-price strategy, giving a product or business a particular image which is appealing to to customers. So you would realize that there are different types of, it can be cigarettes, it can be wines, it can be, but they try to make it look different from that of the competitor. Other non-price strategies include door-to-door deliveries. So if customers know that if we buy from manufacturer A, they are going to deliver the product to us. Unlike buying from producer B, who wants us to go and get it from the shop. So the one that does door-to-door deliveries will always get more customers. Free installations. Some firms say after you buy your product, they go and install it for you. Longer trading hours. When people go to work, some knock off late, but they know that there are always those firms that can trade for longer hours. So that firm will always get the customer support because they know very well that we won't find it closed, and the product that we want, we can only buy it after hours. Extensive after-sales services, expansion into new markets by diversifying the product range, or doing business over the internet. So you would realize that businesses that even survived during this, the COVID-19 pandemic, are the ones that were able to continue doing their business online. So even after this, customers will now become accustomed or become loyal to such a business that continues to provide or serve their needs, even if it doesn't mean that they should come to the shop or the business should visit them at their homes. So those are some of the strategies that can be used by businesses to try and attract customers and beat their competitors without necessarily reducing the price. Because we saw when we introduced here that reducing the price would actually eventually, in all the firms, making a loss. So try to find a way to attract customers and beat your rivals and stay in business. Now, equilibrium for a monopolistic firm. We did equilibrium conditions for monopoly. We were specifically looking at when does a firm make a profit, when does a firm make a loss, what output or what quantity should the firm produce to maximize its what? Its profit. So the same analysis that we did under monopoly, what we also did under perfect market, we're going to apply it here to look at the equilibrium positions of a monopolistic firm, then we also extend to oligopolies. So it says here, short-run equilibrium of a monopolistic firm is similar to that of monopoly. The firm can either make an economic profit or an economic loss in the short run. That's what they mean when they say it's similar to that of a monopoly. Remember, we said a monopoly can make a profit, or it is also possible for them to make a loss in the short run. The same applies again with a monopolistic competitor. It makes a profit, or it can also make a loss in the short run, depending on their costs and their revenue. The firm maximizes profit or minimizes loss where MR is equal to MC. So this becomes the equilibrium. So if a firm produces where its MR is equal to its MC, we say that firm is in equilibrium, and that is where the firm is maximizing profit. So nothing has changed. The analysis that we did under perfect market and what we also did under monopoly still remains. MR is equal to MC still remains our profit maximizing point. The only thing that is important here is to realize that at MR is equal to MC, in the short run, a monopolistic competitor can either make an economic profit or it can make an economic loss depending on their revenues as well as their costs. You can still calculate the profit or the loss for the firm by simply saying profit or loss is cost TR minus TC, total revenue minus total cost. And by TR minus TC, we mean price times quantity, that is for the total revenue, minus cost times quantity, that is for the total cost. So it all depends now. If the total revenue is more than the total cost, then it's an economic profit. But if the total cost is more than the total revenue, then the firm is making an economic loss. So that was the short run. But when we move now to the long run, that's where it is a little bit different. Remember, we said in the long run, or in a monopolistic competitor, there is a freedom of entry and exit. Let's take a firm that was making economic profit in the short run. Those economic profits would attract new firms to enter the market. Remember, there's freedom of entry. So when I see that these guys are making profit from producing a certain product, and there are no barriers to entry, I can freely enter and join them and start producing the same product. But from our comparison, we realize that if this continues, every time new firms are entering the market, we are sharing the customers. The demand for my products or the demand for the products of the firm that is already existing decreases, because some of the customers that were buying your products are now going to buy the products of the new entrant. So demand will continue to decrease. Sales will also continue to decrease. The revenue will also continue to decrease, as well as the profit, because we are now sharing this profit amongst many producers, including those that have entered the market. So what happens eventually? Eventually, we are all going to make normal profits. So one important point to note is that under monopolistic firm, in the long run, the firm will now make normal profit. Where else did we see normal profit in the long run? Under perfect market. You getting it? So hence we said when we started, it's a hybrid structure, because we can see what happened under perfect market existing here again, what happened under monopoly existing here again. That makes it a what? A hybrid structure, a combination of perfect together with imperfect markets. Now, we can illustrate this now graphically. Let's come to our graph here. Remember, we said our demand curve is downward sloping. And because it's imperfect market, our marginal revenue is now lying below the demand curve. So we have our demand curve, our AR, our marginal revenue curve lying below the demand curve. Then, to show that the firm is making normal profits, they happen when your revenue is equal to your cost. Either your total revenue is equal to total cost, or average revenue is equal to average cost. Now, we already have our average revenue curve here. We are now going to draw an average cost curve that forms a tangent, or that touches the AR, to show that at that point where they are touching each other, average revenue and average cost are equal. So this is the situation. This is our AC, but it touches the AR here. It touches our AR at this point. So you can see that at this point, average revenue and average cost are equal here. So this is where our firm is now making what? Normal profit. Why? Because AR and AC are equal. And what output should the firm produce? The firm should now produce an output of QF. You can put a numerical value, maybe 100 units. And also at a price, remember the price is determined on the demand curve. At a price of PF, maybe we can say what? It's 50. To show that this firm is making normal profit, you can actually calculate total revenue minus total what? Cost. What is the total revenue here? Price times quantity, 50 times 100. Total revenue. Minus total cost, again, 50 times quantity. So you can actually see that the profit that the firm is making here is what? Is 0. The fact that they are making a profit of 0 indicates that it is making a normal what? Profit. So this is the equilibrium situation of a firm under monopolistic competition in the long run. Right? Typical exam questions, I'm just going to do 2 with you that are related to the oligopoly as well as monopolistic competition. Let me look for one that I've already put some responses. So we are given logos here. Then the question says, name the market structure depicted by the logos above. Nissan, Honda, BMW, Toyota. Remember when we gave examples, we said the motor car industry is an example of what? Oligopoly. So our answer is oligopoly. Number 2, give an example of a non-price strategy used by this type of a market structure. Advertising, branding, and all those other ones that we gave in our discussion. Number 3, briefly describe the action that these firms can take which is forbidden by law in South Africa. What can they do? What did we say is illegal in South Africa? The firms can collude by increasing prices. So the action that is illegal here, that is forbidden by law, is collusion. So they can collude by increasing prices and work as a collective monopoly. Explain why firms in this industry do not compete with regard to the price of the product. So you can see how they are phrasing the question. They don't make it straightforward to say, explain non-price strategies. Explain why firms do not compete with regard to the price of the product. So indirectly, the question requires you to understand that how else can they compete? They compete by using non-price what? Strategies. Why? Because price competition can be drastic, resulting in all of them making losses, especially when they reduce prices to attract customers. So that was a typical example of a question which they can ask under oligopoly. Another one related to oligopoly, it can be based on the demand curve itself. They give us a demand curve here, no heading. Now they say, name the demand curve shown on the graph. It's a king demand curve. To which market structure is this curve related? We know that the only market structure that is a king demand curve is the what? Is oligopoly. Determine the output produced and price charged by this firm. Remember I said decision is always made at the king. So with oligopoly, the quantity is always determined at the king. The price is also determined at the king, meaning to say this firm is going to produce how many units at the king? 150 units. And what is the price at the king? 90 rands. Right? Explain why the producer cannot increase or reduce the price from 90. Show calculations. Right. Take note here, I said our demand curve has got 2 sections. The upper section relatively elastic, the lower section relatively inelastic. And the price must be where? At the king. Now the question is saying, you can't charge a price above the king. you can also not charge a price below the king. Why? It is because above the king, demand is elastic. Meaning to say, if you increase the price, people are sensitive to price changes. You increase the price, they stop buying your product. Below the king, demand is inelastic. Meaning to say, you can't reduce the price as well. Why? Because if you reduce the price, one, other firms will also reduce their prices. So eventually, you are going to make a loss. So from this analysis, you discover that increasing the prices, revenue is reduced. Reducing the price as well, revenue is what? Reduced. This can be indicated by some calculation here. Look here. Let's say you sell at your price at the king of 90. What is the revenue that you get? Price 90 times 150. You get a revenue of 13,500. But if you want to increase the price, let's say to 100, what will be your revenue? It will be 100 price times the quantity of 100. And how much will be your revenue? It will be 10,000. Okay. You say, let me reduce the price to maybe 50. What will be your revenue? It will be 50 times 190. And what is the revenue that you get? It will be 9,500. So you see that when you increase the price, revenue decreases to 10,000. When you reduce the price as well, revenue decreases to 9,500. But when you keep the price unchanged at the king, that's where you get your maximum revenue. So we advise oligopolies to always charge a price at the king and produce an output at the king. Why? Because that is where they maximize their revenue. Now, I'm going to look at one question that is now based on monopolistic firm. Then we conclude our lesson. It says, start the information below and answer the questions that follow. We are given fast food shops, law firms, hairdressers. It says, monopolistic competitors use various non-price competition methods like advertising, packaging, and services to attract customers. Economic profit is achieved in the short run, and in the long run, normal profit is realized. So we are going to be given questions based on this. It says, give one example of a monopolistic competitor in the information above. Obviously, all these three, fast food, law firms, and hairdressers are examples of monopolistic. Identify one method in the information above that is used in non-price competition: advertising, packaging, and services. The firm is not reducing the price here. It's using other strategies to attract what? Customers. Briefly describe the term monopolistic competition. It is described as a market structure with many buyers and sellers where entry is relatively easy and the product is differentiated. How does a monopolistic competitor differ from a perfect competitor in terms of market information? Remember I said comparison cannot be done only with monopolistic and oligopoly. You can be asked to compare any of the four market structures. In this case, they are asking us to compare a perfect competitor to a monopolistic competitor in terms of information. It says here, information is completely available. Where? In a perfect market. What about in a monopolistic market? Information is incomplete. So these are the key terms that they will be looking at in your response. Completely available in perfect market, but incomplete in monopolistic. Lastly, why do monopolistic competitors achieve only normal profit in the long run? We explained this one. This is because there is free entry and exit. The profits made by existing firms will attract new entrants into the market. As new firms enter the market, they will share the market and profits with existing firms. As a result, all the economic profit will be eliminated eventually each firm's profits will decrease up until they all make zero or normal profits. So basically, these are some of the questions that they can ask you under monopolistic and under oligopolistic markets. Some of the questions that they give us are paragraph questions where they give you 8 marks, and every time you are given a question that requires long answers, you need to write full sentences. I'm sure we once emphasized that one. And also, if it is 8 marks, a minimum of 4 points, fully and well explained. Right. In conclusion, in this presentation, let's check the things that we dealt with. We looked at monopolistic competition and oligopolies. That's our checklist. Yes, we did. We looked at the characteristics of the two market structures and we compared them. We did that one. We explained collusion in detail. We also explained non-price competition. We also did the kinked demand curve, the one that has got 2 sections, relatively elastic and relatively inelastic. We also looked at typical exam questions and their answers. We touched on a few questions under oligopoly and a few questions under monopolistic competition. So this takes us to the end of our presentation. As our former president said, it is in our hands to create a better world for all who live in it. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the second part of the geography lesson, dealing with the category of rural settlements. And today we will have a look at the patterns that these rural settlements exhibit, and then also deal with a very, very important phenomena in terms of the issues that arise with people leaving rural settlements and coming into urban areas. Things that are very relevant and topical, and I think important for the future of our economy and the future of our people and the way in which we live. To start off with, the first patterns that we'll look at, and these are based merely on rural settlements, 2 words, dispersed or nucleated. And in that dispersed or nucleated issue, the thing is space. So to do that, we're going to have to identify the closeness of the settlement. And in doing so, if you work out how close one settlement or a house in one settlement is to another, you will be able to differentiate between these 2 types of settlements. A dispersed settlement, the key word here is this word far. Okay. And on our screen at the moment, the important thing is to have a look at these housing units. And if you compare the one housing unit to the other, you will see that it is relatively far. In our picture here at the bottom of the screen, this is a picture of a typical European countryside. And the important thing here is a settlement, there is another, and they are far from each other. So in terms of a dispersed settlement, the distance is the important part. The opposite of dispersed is the word nucleated. Here, I think important to look at the similar terms, the word cluster, the word compact. Those are the 2 issues that are important. In our illustration here, this is a nice settlement in Vietnam, and you will see here that the buildings are really close to each other. And the distinguishing factor here is the distance. Why is this all important? In the sense that most of us live in urban areas, you will see that these patterns and the recognition of those patterns are important for studying urban issues. So, for example, in putting down a shopping center or in building cluster homes where people are staying close to each other, these concepts and these similarities will be used. So the two, dispersed versus nucleated, and the important issue is the issue of distance. When it comes to other patterns, these are patterns that deal with urban settlements that are found in the countryside. So of the 5 patterns we have here, circular, linear, crossroads, and T-shaped, they have very, very interesting ways in which you can, 1, identify the pattern, and 2, here's the important part, the interesting part about all of this is